The morning began quietly, a typical Wednesday, also known as hump day, when the week is already halfway through and the anticipation for the weekend starts to grow. In the Button household, it was bin day, and the everyday routine blended with football conversations. Just a few days remained before the clash against Chelsea, and the question hanging in the air was, after all, what could be the worst scenario for the team in such a highly anticipated encounter? The day before, Anton had hosted several programs, discussing the players who might be signed and those who were on their way out. The feeling was that this movement of arrivals and departures was still far from over. Among the morning's headlines, one of the main topics concerned Edson Álvarez, who had become the center of speculation and negotiations. The Mexican midfielder, often pointed out as one of the highlights in the transfer market, seemed to have an uncertain future. Conflicting information circulated throughout the previous day. According to some sources, it was believed that Álvarez would fly to Turkey to sign a loan deal with a purchase option with Fenerbahce, the club managed by Jose Mourinho. However, more recent reports suggested that the player decided against traveling at the last moment, supposedly after receiving inquiries from other clubs that made him reconsider. The situation was described as a genuine back and forth. At first, it was thought that the midfielder was practically secured by the Turkish side, but according to people close to the negotiations, Álvarez hesitated in light of late proposals. As a result, the flight to Istanbul, which was meant to formalize his move, never saw him on board. According to sources such as the outlet Claret and Hugh, West Ham have been using intermediaries in an attempt to move on players deemed surplus to requirements. The difficulty, however, has been finding buyers interested in permanent deals, since most of the offers so far involved only loans. In Álvarez's case, an agent close to the player stated that the offer from Fenerbahce was the only truly solid one at that point. But there were obstacles. The Turkish club would agree to cover only half of his wages, and even with the addition of a loan fee, the amount would not compensate for the remaining salary. Other European sides, such as Inter Milan, Borussia Dortmund, and FC Porto, had considered the possibility of signing him, but eventually withdrew from the race. This only reinforced the feeling that Álvarez's future was far from resolved, and that, for him, the so-called Turkish delight might not materialize as his next destination. While the saga surrounding Edson Álvarez's future remained unresolved, fresh information stirred the background. The outlet Claret and Hugh reported that West Ham had made 3 formal offers for midfielders on the same day. The news caused both surprise and skepticism, as many supporters questioned if there had been so much time available during the transfer window. Why had the club waited until now, so close to the deadline, to intensify its pursuit? This doubt only reinforced the impression that the planning had not been particularly well organized. According to agents involved, one of the offers was directed towards Matías Fernández, the Southampton midfielder. West Ham had already previously tabled a bid in the region of £30 million, but the Saints rejected it. The South Coast club had in fact already lined up a replacement for Fernández, which would open the door for his departure. Even so, the board expected to receive more than what had been offered so far. Rumors also linked Nottingham Forest with the player, but it is believed that the Reds may have scaled back their spending in this window. Amidst these speculations, other names also emerged. James McAtee, a promising youngster, and Omari Richardson, another talent under close observation, were mentioned as potential targets at some point in the window, but so far nothing concrete had developed. West Ham found itself caught in the middle of a web of rumors where almost every midfielder seemed to be under consideration. In addition, over the past weekend, reports surfaced that the club had offered more than £40 million for the Brazilian André Santos from Chelsea. This claim prompted direct comparisons. If there was genuine willingness to pay such an amount for Santos, why not increase the bid for Fernandes? Southampton were reportedly willing to negotiate at $50 million, while West Ham appeared unwilling to go beyond 30. Many fans suggested that it would be enough to find a reasonable middle ground, perhaps $40 million, to seal the deal. Yet, as on so many other occasions, the feeling was that the club risked getting lost in disputes over figures and ultimately failing to strengthen the squad in time. Another player mentioned as a possible target was Engalier Mukai, referred to by Anton in earlier programs, and also by the well-known insider XW employee. Although there were signs of genuine interest, nothing suggested that a deal was close to being concluded. Finally, the name of Josh Brownhill also surfaced. The midfielder often linked with West Ham in rumors divided opinion among the supporters. For some, he could bring experience and stability. For others, he represented an uninspiring option, a low-impact choice at a moment when the club needed high-caliber reinforcements. With each new name floated, the sense grew that the board were firing in multiple directions without a clear strategy. Supporters and commentators recalled other windows where the club seemed to chase 4 or 5 similar targets simultaneously, only to end up signing no one. This comparison was reinforced by the memory of the case of Mads Hermansen when the team tracked several players with similar profiles, but ultimately lost focus in the process. Speculation about reinforcements continued to mount, with the English press consistently listing potential names linked to West Ham. Among them, one that gained strength was Lorenzo Pellegrini, the 29-year-old Italian midfielder who had represented the national side, though he had not played a full match for the Squadra Azzurra in the past 2 years. Despite that absence from recent call-ups, Pellegrini was still regarded as a technically gifted player, capable of dictating the tempo in midfield and offering versatility. His international experience would certainly add weight to the squad. But like so many other options, his arrival seemed more of a rumor than a concrete negotiation. Another name that emerged was that of young Hayden Hackney from Middlesbrough. The player had been monitored by several Premier League clubs following strong performances in the Championship. Ipswich Town had even opened talks to sign him, but the negotiations stalled and ultimately collapsed. This situation reignited the interest of other sides, including West Ham and Aston Villa. In Villa's case, there was a clear need to strengthen the squad after the sale of Jacob Ramsey, which made the search for reinforcements a priority. It was estimated that Hackney could be available for around £20 million, a relatively accessible figure considering the midfielder's age and potential, as he had already represented England at under-21 level. The interest in Hackney, however, was not exclusive. The general impression was that West Ham had a short list of 4 or 5 players with similar profiles, as had happened in previous transfer windows. The problem with this type of approach was that it often led to delays in decision-making, leaving space for other quicker clubs to conclude deals first. For many supporters, this strategy felt like a repetition of past mistakes. The uncertainty over targets and the difficulty in closing negotiations generated frustration among the fan base, who longed for transparency. Many argued it would be better if the club openly admitted which players were being pursued rather than keeping the list secret. On the other hand, some defended the discretion, noting that revealing names could alert rivals and drive up prices. Caught between these two perspectives, West Ham continued to be surrounded by rumors, but with little in the way of concrete confirmations. Over the years, this stance from the board had become a frequent target of criticism. Whenever there seemed to be a genuine opportunity to strengthen the squad, bureaucratic details, financial disputes, or a lack of firm decision-making invariably delayed matters. The outcome was a recurring pattern of drawn-out negotiations marked by steps forward and steps back without clear priorities. In this context, more skeptical supporters believed that the supposed 3 bids placed in a single day might well have been no more than a media ploy, something to show that the club was acting without much chance of real results. After all, it was not the first time that reports of mystery bids had surfaced during the final stretch of a transfer window. Even so, hope remained alive. Some fans believed that despite all the uncertainty, at least one major signing for midfield could still be secured. Others dreamed of 2 additions, something that would provide the squad with the depth needed to face not only Premier League fixtures, but also European competitions. The pressure on the board was growing, with a clear awareness that to avoid even harsher criticism, they would need to deliver tangible results. Expectations were that the coming hours and days would be decisive in defining the club's direction. As the news spread, so too did the anxiety surrounding the outcome of these negotiations. According to fresh information, West Ham had indeed placed 3 official bids on the table to strengthen the midfield, but the intention had never been to sign all of the players at once. The plan, according to some sources, was to secure at least one reinforcement with the possibility of two if conditions were favorable. What seemed clear was that it was highly unlikely all three names would be signed immediately. This stance reflected a pragmatic strategy, diversifying the targets, keeping different options open in order to increase the chances of concluding at least one deal. However, for many supporters, this method sounded like a risky gamble, as the window was limited in time and rivals were moving quickly with their own business. The memory of previous frustrating windows still weighed heavily on the supporters' minds. There was also a widespread perception that the club required two new midfielders to balance the squad, not just one. The season ahead promised to be demanding with commitments, not only in the Premier League, but also in domestic cups and potentially on the European stage. Players such as Edson Alvarez, still in an uncertain situation, might even leave the squad, further heightening the urgency for reinforcements. Meanwhile, the atmosphere inside the club was one of expectation. Some members of the coaching staff expressed confidence that at least one deal would go through, but there was also a clear awareness that nothing was guaranteed. The club's own track record in transfer dealings advised caution. In the programs that analyzed the daily developments, optimistic voices also emerged. Some believed that even with the management problems and drawn-out negotiations, West Ham still had the pulling power to attract quality players, particularly given the platform of the Premier League and the appeal of playing in London. Others, however, took a more pessimistic view, fearing the club would reach the Chelsea match without any concrete additions, repeating a pattern all too familiar. The supporters themselves remained split between hope and skepticism. Some dreamed of big-name arrivals such as Lorenzo Pellegrini or Matias Fernandes, who could transform the midfield. Others, more realistic, accepted that names like Josh Brownhill or Hayden Hackney might be the most viable options given the financial circumstances and the shrinking time frame. In the end, the prevailing feeling was that the club stood at a crossroads. The coming hours would be decisive in determining whether the board could deliver the reinforcements the squad so badly needed, or whether once again the transfer window would close with frustration and unfulfilled promises. And so, amid expectations, speculation, and uncertainty, West Ham approached yet another important fixture, with the supporters following every step and waiting anxiously for signs that this time the story might reach a different conclusion.